If you are broke mentally, you will be broke in your wallet. This is a quote by Mpheng Ayat Thamae. In truth, we are often taught how to make money, but never the mental and emotional resources required to manage these financial resources. Furthermore, setting boundaries is often very uncomfortable for many people. In today's episode, I have the privilege of speaking to Mpheng Ayat Thamae, a counseling psychologist, and we are going to unpack what financial resources versus mental resources are, and of course, how to go about setting our boundaries. Mpheng, good afternoon and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, TK.
So maybe let's start with you introducing yourself to people who actually don't know who Mpheng is.
Mm-hmm. So firstly, thank you. I'm so glad we finally made it happen. I was just thinking we've been setting and rescheduling, but I'm glad that we eventually had time. Lebitso la ka ke Mpheng Thamae. I'm a counseling psychologist by profession, and I'm in private practice in Lesotho. So that's who I am. I think the people who listened to our last audio podcast will remember the voice. But yeah, thank you.
The beautiful voice, actually.
Thank you.
So, talking about the last episode we did, maybe let's do a quick recap. Financial resources versus mental resources. For somebody who does not know what this is, let's maybe unpack why this particular topic.
Firstly, it's not a difficult definition of textbooks, and I really would encourage your listeners to listen to the audio, because we explained a lot of things in there, but I'll just do that now. When we talk about financial and mental resources, it came up from our conversation, actually, this topic. And we're talking about how we're usually taught, make money, do this for your life, go to school. But rarely are we taught about the emotional and mental resources needed to maintain and sustain that. So that's really what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the mental resources that you employ. For example, boundaries, to make sure that after you secure the bag remains there. So I think in a nutshell, that's what we want to say about mental resources, like literally mental, emotional resources and financial resources.
And I love this quote, if you are broke mentally, you will be broke in your wallet. What inspired that particular quote?
I think it's our conversation, really. Remember, we're just flowing, and I think a good example would be, even celebrities. They will have money, and then you will hear later that they went rock bottom because they probably didn't know, they were just, not saving money, not understanding things. And I guess we'll keep going back to boundaries because that is the line for today. So I think we got inspired from our conversations when we're trying to talk about the content. And yeah, I think that's where it came from.
And I think what I love about that particular episode, which I'll obviously link to this particular conversation that we're having, is just how important boundaries were. Yes, we did not get into a lot of detail then, but which we'll do in this particular episode. So Mpheng, money remains a big taboo and a sensitive topic in many households, and what you see is, for example, people have a very weird relationship around money, and people relate differently whether the money is there or not. So how does money impact relationships, whether positively or negatively?
I think money affects everything, really, but we'll hone it into relationships. It creates a dynamic. It definitely has a power dynamic in most relationships. We made an example of this. If you're the friend, when we're out, you're the one that's always paying. Are you generous or are you controlling? That's what we understand. And I think a lot of times we underestimate what money means, and you just feel like, no, we're in a friendship, he doesn't mind paying, she doesn't mind paying, but it creates a dynamic. Every transaction sort of determines the texture of the relationship, because eventually people start feeling like, when you have those friends that you're like, am I calling this one or am I not? Because, I feel like people start to feel very used. And I'm not saying that we can't be generous. I'm not saying that in friendships, sometimes we're in different places, right? Maybe we have friends, maybe they're able to get a better job earlier than you. They went into a course that probably has more market. So those are fair, but I think money adds those dynamics if we don't communicate and we're not careful to really be aware of what it means.
I love it when you say we don't communicate. appreciate, because it also touches on that sensitivity and that taboo that why are we not talking about this? We talk about everything else but money. So now, Mpheng, I have worked extremely hard. Myself and the listeners have worked hard. We've graduated. We are, and we want to make mommy and daddy proud, or just mommy if it's a single parent, or daddy if it's a single parent as well. So now things are not going as well as they should be, and I'm not thriving like I should be. How then do I deal with this pressure of making the parents proud, though things aren't going as well as I had intended them to be?
You mean to make them proud in terms of money?
Well, money, life. It could be a doctor, it could be a psychologist, it could be a financial advisor. But, things aren't going too well. But I've always wanted to make them proud. And I feel like I'm not making them proud.
I said this to you of that we were talking about this, and I was thinking that I feel like part of what we do, or the job as a psychologist, I feel like we have superpowers. That's what I've been saying. I really feel like we have superpowers because of just the amount of things and the texture of things that we deal with, the severity of things. And this topic, like even if you're asking that, it seems like such a simple question, but there's so many things to that. And because I'm a psychologist and I make things difficult and just, and I say that quite respectfully to myself, to say we see a lot of dynamics in things. So sometimes it feels like we're too deep, for nothing. So I'll explain in terms of family, and I will just make it a bit broader, that sometimes we are wounded children. You are a person that has never gotten approval from your father, your mother. You've never gotten, hey, I'm proud of you. Hey, you're doing really well. So you grow up with this sense of feeling inadequate, of feeling like I need to prove myself all the time, right? So money becomes a dynamic in that, because even when you're broke, even when you don't have money, every time they call from home and you need to help them, you can't even communicate, hey, I don't have money today, or this month is looking a bit bad. Because what? You're a wounded child that wants to fill that void. Because every time you give money back, or you give more money that you don't have, it sort of, you think it fills the void, but you keep needing more and more of that. So I think those are one of the things. Like, we're wounded children, depending on your background, and we're always wanting to heal that. And it also goes into people pleasing. Sometimes people are not very assertive, and I'm aware that in relationships, we're passive and we're aggressive at some point, and it's not all the time that you say, no, I can't, right? But there are times where you need to put boundaries, because if you're people pleasing, then you can never say no, right? Like all the time, every time there's an emergency, you need to help. You know those family members who always need 200, to close this. Please, e-wallet, and all the time. And you're always this person who's, under a lot of disaster management, doing a lot of disaster management. My dad usually says this. He's like, people always have emergencies.
They do.
They always have emergencies. I need 100 rand. If I'm my child is sick, you need to do this. And if you don't reply, or you don't have the money, 2 weeks later, no one has died. How much of an emergency was that, right? So it's those boundaries that you have to put to yourself first, to say, okay, dead soldiers don't save lives. That's what we say in trauma counseling. So if I don't have the money, what money can I give? So you find a lot of us that we're in debt because we're trying to fill and create this image at home that we are thriving, we're doing this. And there's nothing wrong, TK, with being generous, with helping your family. We're in an African context. We understand much better that when you succeed, you give back home. It's something that we know. It's not very foreign. But I guess what I'm advocating for is helping from a healed place, helping from a healthy place, so that in that trying to help, then you don't deplete yourself to nothing. Yeah,
I think people like me in this context will be a personal finance coach or a financial advisor. We always touching to what you just said, we speak about setting boundaries, setting financial boundaries, and I think you've touched a lot on the boundaries and stuff. So in the last episode, on the podcast episode that we spoke about earlier on, is we touched on a bit of black tax. So there's family, there's relatives who constantly call you, asking you for that e-wallet, calling you, asking you for that 100 Rand for an emergency. In that context, how then do I set those boundaries and actually practice setting those boundaries?
When we talk about this, and we'll talk this with my patients when I'm at work, and I'll say, why didn't you say no? And they'll say, oh, Mpheng, I feel so bad. I don't like doing that to people. They never say I was scared to set boundaries. I said this to a friend the other day, that in setting boundaries, there's a healthy amount of rejection that happens. And that's what we're trying to run away from. Just a tiny bit, because you're saying no. It's not from a bad place, but I can't. So in saying no and setting boundaries, people have to be comfortable with those things. I think I said it in the audio that you have to be comfortable with the names that come with it. I probably have been called stingy at some point, because I'm very clear. This is how I'm willing to help. This is how I will help, right? My dad said this. I was telling you the other day that my dad must invoice us for intellectual property, because I'm always saying my dad says this. But he said this the other day when we were talking about these things, and he was saying that when you set, people must be very clear. Okay, this is how much I'm going to be able to give a month, since I have bills and everything. Be consistent in that. But once in a while, be generous and surprise them and give them amount beyond that. But at least it's not money they're expecting, right? And you can't now abandon yourself as a generous person and say, I always say this to my clients, just because you're realizing that I'm this person that has been giving, you don't now go to the other continent where you don't give. I don't give, I'm setting boundaries. You do it in such a way that you don't abandon who you are. If you're a generous person, you like giving, you like buying things for people and everything, just do it from a healed place. That does not leave you depleted. Again, I repeat, dead soldiers don't save lives.
Dead soldiers don't save lives. I think as we get to the end of our conversation today, you did touch a bit on this as well, but there is also peer pressure amongst friends, and I always want to pay the bill, like you mentioned earlier on. I always want to be the one who is seen to be thriving as friends. So let's maybe unpack a bit on that. I know you touched on it a bit earlier on, but let's maybe elaborate a bit more on friendships and those boundaries that need to come into place and some of the issues we need to be mindful of as friends.
I think, with friendships, because they're still part of relationships, right? So they're still part of, family, although the nuances are there. I think just like I've said earlier, with friendships and generally, money can either make or break a friendship. There are people you will never lend money to, because you know that this one, if I lend the money, they'll never return it, and it's going to create a dynamic in our relationship. So sometimes you choose the friendship. You choose the friend. It's not that you don't want to give money. And sometimes we've said this with friends, then you can give money that you're willing to lose.
Sure.
Because there are people, and we know our friends. Sometimes you just know who they are. And I think sometimes we want to forget that, and we want to pretend like money isn't anything, but it really is something. It has dynamics around it that need to be clearly communicated. But I think I'll start to that all the time is, are you generous or are you controlling? These are things when I bring up to conversations, people are like, Mpheng, we were living just normal lives until you came with this deepness. What's your problem? But I think these are healthy questions to ask yourself, so that also you don't feel like you are very depleted and now you're controlling and everything else. I think those are healthy questions to ask yourself.
Yeah, that's really deep. I also felt the depth of... Okay, so in closing, Mpheng, what should we know about setting boundaries, either as professionals, as people in relationships, whether it's family, friendships, situationships, or whatever the case may be? So, closing remarks.
You know what? I think boundaries, I must admit that they're difficult. So when you feel that they're difficult, don't feel like, oh, I'm going to run away. It's part of what they are. Like I said, they have a healthy amount of rejection. You know, sometimes a no, even if it comes from a great place, people still feel like you said no. And I think we have to be comfortable with that. I think we have to be comfortable with the names that come with setting boundaries, because a lot of times people are not ready for that. That is when people who struggle with people pleasing will struggle, because once they get a very bad appraisal from their parents, from their children, from their children, from their friends, then they just return and then go back to that place where they're enabling very, very bad ways of relating. So just to say, I'm sure and I empathize that they're not that easy to make, but once done, that they're very healthy and can keep relationships.
So I think, thank you so much for that. That is very insightful and stuff. So for me, you have a quote that we should probably publish somewhere. If you're broke mentally, you will be broke in your wallet. I feel like maybe leave us with one more for the listeners,
One more what, TK?
One more quote, one more, that punchline that just wraps up this amazing conversation. Looking at the main camera, what do you want my listeners and viewers of Escapes and Money Adventures with TK to say? You can use the same one.
I feel like when rappers, they're like, throw us a bar, you're just like, oh, can I do it now? But I actually thought of one. Then I think that's what I'm saying right now. That in setting boundaries, there is a healthy amount of rejection, and that's okay. That's what I want to say. I
was kind of hoping you say dysfunction. There's a conversation we had in the last one about dysfunctions. Yes.
You should have said that's what you want me to say.
I was hoping you'd get the hint.
You'd get the we had a conversation around dysfunction.
Absolutely.
That sometimes there's been such dysfunctions that have been functional. We've been living in a particular way and coping in ways that are not really healthy. And Tukiso now goes for therapy and suddenly wants to change the entire thing. And I think we're not fair to ourselves to want that we must be very kind and patient with ourselves and be aware that from being aware to complete change is an entire process. So to constantly call yourself out, check on yourself, but then be aware that just because you're aware that, hey, in this family, I'm being abused, and maybe my father is asking too much money from me, or these people are being abusive, it doesn't mean it changes that day. From awareness, you find ways to deal with it in such a way that it doesn't totally break the relationship.
From awareness, you then embark on a journey of working through that. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mpheng Thamae. She's a counseling psychologist, and wow. This conversation was really amazing, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
For people who want to reach out to you or connect with you, can you share, or is it by invite only, or?
No, it's not even by invite only. I'm in private practice in Lesotho, so people can reach out at any time. I think we will leave the contents in the link.
So I'll definitely link her contact details, her professional contact details below if you want to have an appointment with her. And of course, the 3 rules when it comes to Escapes and Money Adventures with TK. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It is also available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and many other podcasting platforms. So just look out for Money Adventures with TK. And this is a big thank you to my production team, Matsuso Photography and J Productions. Yo, guys, the team that I have, we are building an empire here. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think about this conversation. If you are a wounded child, let us know as well so that we can help you get the healing that you need. And of course, share this video with people, share this video and podcast with people who can benefit from it as well, because also, we need to heal as a society. And last but not least, subscribe to the YouTube channel and, of course, to the podcast across the different distribution points. And until the next one, love, peace, and money. Oh, she knows it. I love it.
I remember
Signing out. Thank you, guys. Until the next one, love, peace, and happiness. Goodbye.